Here's Golf to Go with Frank LaRosa.
Hello and welcome to People Who Play the Game. I'm really excited to have Charlie Mechem with me today. Charlie's legal and business career spans 6 decades. Charlie, you were an attorney, you were a former commissioner of the LPGA, and a consultant and advisor to both Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus. And you just released a book called Arnie and Jack, Stories of My Long Friendship with Two Remarkable Men. Charlie Mechem, welcome to People Who Play the Game.
I'm delighted to be with you, Frank.
As anyone would say, that title is really exciting, and just puts a whole lot of thoughts into people's minds. And we want to spend a lot of time talking about your book, but let's back up a little bit. And how did you get into the game? What was your first relationship with the game of golf?
I had 3 buddies. We hung out together in a little town in southeastern Ohio where I was born, Nelsonville, Ohio. And we decided we wanted to play golf. We were probably 15 or so, all of us. And there was no golf course in my hometown. And it was a 9-hole course just up the road a few miles. So we just went there and started to play golf, which of course is the worst way to take up the game. And it reflected itself in my lifelong inability to play very well. But you know, Frank, in a different sense, it made me care less about how well I played and more about the camaraderie that comes from the game and the beauty of the venues on which you play it. And I'm not suggesting I wouldn't rather have been a better player, but I think not starting until 15 or 16 years old and not having any formal instruction maybe had a benefit.
Boy, I totally agree. You know, when I talk about the game, it's less about what I shot and more about who I was with and some of the fun things I learned.
Absolutely.
As a young man, was there anyone that kind of inspired you to to set you on your way to be the person you are today?
First of all, and this is not a direct response, but I see in the background of your wall here a Red Sox, and my boyhood idol was Ted Williams.
Oh,
it absolutely blew me away, and so in that sense, but in a different sense, I think, to be maybe a little bit corny about it, my father and mother and my brother and sister were my main inspirations for lots and lots of years.
You know, one of my fondest memories is seeing Ted Williams and Jackie Jensen hit back-to-back home runs in Fenway Park.
Well, you know, an incredible lady just passed away, Joan Joyce, the great woman softball pitcher. Mm-hmm. And she was on the LPGA tour for a few years. I got to know her a bit, and she always liked to tell the story of striking out Ted Williams. And she did. Oh my God, you couldn't even see the ball when she threw it.
What's the best piece of advice you ever got?
I got this both from Arnie and from my dad. And that was never forget where you came from.
Yeah.
And Jack, although he never said that to me particularly, he lived it, because Columbus has always continued to be a very important part of his life. And I think Arnie and I, of course, grew up in very small towns in the eastern part of the Middle West. But I think there's no piece of advice that is, I remind myself more than once, don't ever forget where you came from.
I like that. As I mentioned earlier, you were an attorney. You were in the corporate world in some very influential positions. But let's talk a little bit about your role as commissioner of the LPGA. How did that come about, and what was that like?
But before we do that, I would say one thing about my my lawyer days. And I won't bore you with why, but I represented both the Cincinnati Reds and the Cincinnati Bengals. And those are happy memories as well. So
you've lived a charmed life, Charlie.
I've had an absolutely incredible life, and the friends that I've made, and some very famous, some not so famous, but all people that I'm glad I knew. The way it started with me, we're talking about Arnie and Jack, or how do you want to phrase the question?
Well, with regard to the LPGA, time as commissioner, what
okay,
what kind of stands out? What are you most proud of, and how did that actually come about in the first place?
My company, Taft Broadcasting Company, which I ran for 22 years, I guess, we did a lot of things. Radio, TV, we built amusement parks. We owned a Hanna-Barbera cartoon company, did a lot of things. And one of the things that we had done was buy a lot of land north of Cincinnati to build our first amusement park. And it was more land than we needed because we wanted to get more than we needed. And it ended up, we had about 100 acres left over. And one of my guys came to me one day and said, Charlie, we ought to build a golf course. And I said, well, why not? And so it was pretty easy to pick a designer. That was 1970. And the Golden Bear was a pretty obvious choice to design on an Ohio course. So he did that. And then we hosted a PGA Tour event for 5 years, but then we hosted the LPGA Championship for 10 years. And that was one of their majors. And in the course of those 10 years, I got to know a lot of the gals. And so when I was approached to become commissioner, they had parted company with the prior commissioner. When I was approached, I didn't know all these gals intimately, but I knew them well. And I'll tell you one funny story. At least I've always found it funny and amazing, really. I was being interviewed by the search committee, and on the search committee was the chairwoman of the LPGA board, a banker from Buffalo, and her name was Mary Jo Jacoby. And they were questioning me. Most of the questions were, what the hell does a 60-year-old man think he can do with 144 young women? So I kind of danced around that. And then Mary Jo said, Mr. Mechem, how long did you say you were at Taft Broadcasting Company? And I said, Mary Jo, just about 22 years. And she said, that's interesting. During that time, how many secretaries did you have? I remember thinking, that is the best question I have ever heard. Because, if I'd had to say 15.
You're hard to get along with.
Yeah. And so instead I said, I'm thrilled and happy to tell you 1. So I've never forgotten that. Anyway, I entered the LPGA with fondness for, respect for, and some really good friendships with the players.
As we move into today, and it's with someone with with your background and everything you've done, it's a disservice to you to kind of bounce around and not give your career the credit it's due. But we're here to talk about your book today, and sure. Arnie and Jack, stories of my long friendship with two remarkable men. How did some of this was chance, was it not, that you just kind of got to spend so much time with them initially?
Well, as I indicated, Jack and I first met in 1970. And after he built the golf course, we did a number of deals together. Probably most notably is my company produced and distributed the Golf My Way video, which is probably still the greatest video, golf instructional video. And then over the years, we just did things together, and I got to know him better and better and better. Arnie, on the other hand, I really didn't meet until I was with the LPGA, and he came out. Arnie really liked women's golf, and he promoted women's golf, was involved in it. So whenever we would have some sort of a mixed team event, Arnie was always there, and I got to know him. And so over the 5 years or so that I was with the LPGA, he and I spent a lot of time together. So it turned out the final event of my LPGA career was just down the road from where I live now at PGA West. And I noticed it was a team event, and Jack and Arnie were playing together. So I went down and to wish him well and said hello to him. And Arnie said, "I've been meaning to call you. Can you have a beer with me after my round?" Well, of course, who would say no to that? So naturally, I said yes. Well, we met for a beer. Typical Arnie. He bought us each a beer and then looked me right in the eye and he said, "I want you to come in and help me run my companies." Well, I almost picked myself off the floor, Frank, because I didn't see this coming. And he said, "Yeah," he said, "IMG does a great job for me, but I want somebody that can handle some personal matters, that sort of thing." So I said, "Arnie, I'm flattered beyond belief, but I can't do it right now because I've already made a couple of commitments in Cincinnati when I leave the LPGA so I can't spend full time." Well, he said, "Let's keep thinking about it." A couple of months later, he called me and he said, "I've got an idea." And he said, I want you to become my consultant and advisor. That way you can still have time to do the other things that you need to do. And I said, "That sounds great. I'd love to do that." And then he said, "Just two things. I want you and your wife to move to Bay Hill." We were living down in South Florida. "And secondly, I want you to share this office with me." He had an office with two offices side by side with a big door in between. So our seats were probably 6 feet apart. And so for 10 years, I sat in that chair 6 feet away. It's so funny, Frank. He would get his mail and he'd take it, sail it through the door and say, "What do you think of this?" So we had just a wonderful, wonderful time together.
Oh my gosh, it's 10 years of that. Wow. What a relationship you can build, just being in the next office with someone, even if you're talking and not even looking face to face.
Well, and he was very good about involving me in everything. And I know one day, for example, I think you'll enjoy this story. 3 representatives of the USGA said they wanted to come and see Arnie. One of them, by the way, was Fred Ridley, who's now chairman of Augusta. So the 3 of them came in. I said, "Arnie, what are they coming for?" He said, "I have no idea, but I want you to sit in." So I did. And I think Fred was the spokesperson. And he said, "Arnie, you've done so much for the game, so much for the USGA. We'd like to name our new museum for you." Well, he was speechless. And when he got his talk back, he said, "I can't tell you." He said, "I feel like I won another Open." I never forgot that line. Wow. So I was deeply involved in everything that went on.
I've had the opportunity to interview both of them, and they both have such different personas, but they are both really genuine people. And you certainly get that impression with everything people see about Arnold Palmer. And the way Jack started his career is like, well, maybe he's not quite as as open as Arnold Palmer. 2 different gentlemen, but boy, so gracious, both of them.
Yes, and although they were different, their similarities by far, I think, outshone their differences. The things that really mattered, family, friends, respect for the game, for the ethics and morality of the game. In every way, they were spot on together in those really important things.
The folks that have read your book and written about it is as impressive as what you've done. But I just want to kind of go through a couple of these. Tom Watson said, "There can never be enough stories about these 2 great legends from the game of golf. Charlie has captured and told us some of the best. Annika Sorenstam. Charlie is the best storyteller ever. David Faraday. Charlie Mechem, like the two subjects of this book, is an American treasure. And Jack Nicklaus himself said there isn't a person who knows more about Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus than Charlie Mechem. And Jaime Diaz from the Golf Channel, who here in Sacramento, we have a soft spot for because he started his career at the Sacramento Bee. He said, you have many gifts, the greatest among them being your genius for true friendship. That's pretty remarkable stuff that people are writing about you in your book.
Well, I appreciated all of those thoughts, and all of the people you mentioned were wonderfully friendly to me. And as a matter of fact, I sent Tom a copy of my book, a final copy. He'd seen the rough draft, and he sent me the nicest note back. And I want to just read one paragraph. I know I will enjoy reading your reflections and laughing at your humor that I know will be peppered throughout your work. And I thought, here Tom Watson, he doesn't know. He already wrote a nice thing in the book. He doesn't write me a note, but he did. And those, Frank, those are the people that built golf. Not the only people. I mean, you go back to people before that, most notably Bob Jones, but people like Watson and Nicklaus and Palmer. And I hope the game doesn't go off in other directions, but that's a whole nother story.
Boy, you're absolutely right, and it kind of gives me chills when you mention the names, and they knew their place. They knew what the game meant. They knew what the game meant not only to them, but to the world, and they knew that someone had paved the way, and it was their responsibility to continue that.
This is not in the book. I don't know whether I chose to not put it in or just didn't think of it till later, but Arnold really didn't like to be called king, because he said to me more than once, Charlie, there's no king of golf. And you knew exactly what he meant. Mm-hmm. And he was right. He was absolutely right. So anyway, I've always smiled about that because that said an awful lot about Arnold Palmer.
We kind of talked a little bit about how they were when you met them. And, I think one of the things I saw in the book was that Jack even recommended you for the commissioner of the LPGA.
Without my knowledge, when I was offered the job, I remember thinking, I know a lot about golf, but I don't know everything. And I ought to talk to somebody that can tell me if I'm really making a mistake to take this job. So I went in to see Jack at his office, and I said, Jack, I've been offered the job of commissioner of the LPGA, and I wonder, do you think I should take it? And he said, you damn well better. I recommended you. Totally blown away by that.
You talked about how important it was to not forget, where you came from, you write about it in the book. They carry that same focus on life as well. Talk a little bit about that, Charlie. Arnold
always regarded Latrobe as his home. And I remember one day I was with him there, and he said, I want to get in the golf cart. We drove all around Latrobe, and he pointed out the things that he had helped get going. He was so proud of that. And I thought of all the things that he has done. Latrobe is still that special. And Jack, although he doesn't live in Columbus, God knows he spends a lot of time there. And his monument, the Muirfield Village Golf Club, as well as he has a home there. And so I think, and I'm prejudiced, of course, because I'm a Midwestern guy. I think there's certain Midwestern values that are solid, maybe almost corny sometimes, but they're real. And I think those two guys really had them in spades.
We talk about them as icons and how important they were to the world. their wives were very important to them, keeping them on track and being, as gracious as they can be in the midst of all of this, chaos going on all the time.
It was unbelievable. And I say in the book, and I don't know that this has ever been said before in quite the way I've said it, but the point is that I think if there hadn't been a Winnie Palmer or a Barbara Nicholas in those early days when people were beating up so much on Jack and so much ugly stuff was going on, they supported their husbands to a degree, not in a subsidiary way or a condescending way, but they loved them and cared for them and supported them totally. It would not have, Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer would not have been the same men without Winnie and Barb.
To think about, from the time you met them, until certainly Arnold's unfortunate passing and Jack today, how have they changed along the way, and in what way are they better people?
You mean Jack and Arnie?
Yes.
I honestly don't think they changed much at all.
Wow.
They started out and ended up the people that they started out and were. I really believe that. They became more sophisticated maybe, but Arnie's charisma, I think, shone just as bright when he first came to the tours later. And Jack's overwhelming talent was just blinding. And you don't need to get into an argument about who's the greatest player of all time. It's useless to do that. But his talent was so incredible, and that never changed, including when he was 46 in the Masters.
You have some great chapter titles in the book, and just kind of stirs thoughts about a reader getting to the book. Jack's stunning advice to me, a typical day at Bay Hill, Jack's first visit to Arnie's restaurant, Jack and Barbara's 80th birthday celebration. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And one of the stories that I got a kick out of was what's an Arnold Palmer?
It's a great story, and I wasn't sure I knew, because I'd heard a dozen stories. But Russ Meyer, who was one of Arnold's dearest, closest friends, said that he really thought he had the true story. Arnie had been playing in a tournament, I guess, a very hot day, and he went in the clubhouse restaurant, and the waitress came over and said, "Mr. Palmer, what would you have?" And he said, "Can you mix a iced tea and a lemonade?" And she said, "Sure, I can do that." So she then goes to the next table to ask the lady there, what would she like? And the lady said, "Isn't that Arnold Palmer?" And she said, "Yes." And she said, I think I'll have what he had. I'll have an Arnold Palmer." And that's the way it happened.
That promo that ESPN does of Arnold mixing the Arnold Palmer is a classic.
That's been a huge, and it still is, huge success. By the way, one of the stories that I like is called Oops. It's near the end of the book. And the oops stands for, I put my foot in my mouth, but I got it out successfully. Arnold and Kit, his second wife after Winnie passed away. Arnold and Kit and my wife Marilyn and I went to Palmer's restaurant, which is about 5 minutes from where we live here in La Quinta, for dinner one night. So we started talking about growing older, becoming mature. And I said to Arnie, and I believe this strongly, I said, "Arnie, my feeling is you don't really reach maturity until you meet someone who is better at what you do best." And I thought, oh God, why did I say that? But Arnold typically said, "That was Jack just like that. That was Jack. He saw Jack. He said, then I matured. But think about that. I think we've all had that in our life. When you really grow up is when you can look at somebody and say, they're better at what I do than I am.
That is, self-awareness at that point. That's a
Yep.
great story. I don't know if that's your favorite story about Arnold, but it's certainly a great story. But what would be your favorite story about Jack?
The first business deal I made with Jack, after we had made the golf course deal, was at a tournament. He was playing in Jacksonville, and we had very pleasant dinner and concluded the deal that we were working on. I don't remember now what it was, but it was important and very pleasant. So the next day, I go to the golf course and I position myself between a green and the next tee, and I knew Jack would be walking right by. So he did, and I looked at him, and I didn't wave, but and he walked right by me, didn't blink an eye, oh my God, what have I done? And a little later, I ran into one of his pals, and I said, is Jack upset with me for some reason? And he said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, he just walked by me and didn't blink an eye. And he said, Charlie, he never even saw you. Because when he's playing golf, there's only one thing. He goes to the next tee and hits the next shot. And I remember thinking, other than maybe Tiger, there's no one ever had a greater concentration level than Jack Nicklaus.
How remarkable that that you got to spend so much of your life and their lives together, and with a trust that goes beyond just a relationship. And as a long time confidant and friend, how would you remember each of them?
Arnie was precisely the same person in public and private. And don't let anyone ever tell you differently. He absolutely the same. Jack was different. As I said, competitively, when he got on the golf course, that was all there was. But then I remember we played golf together down at the Bears Club. I was always mortified when he asked me to play because I hated to stand over the ball saying the greatest player ever played the game is watching me make an idiot of myself. But after the round, we went back to his house, and it was a football game on, I think, and he turned on the TV and he pulled over a lazy boy chair, pushed it back, and Frank, within 10 minutes, he had 10 grandkids on that chair around his neck, hugging him. And I remember thinking at the time, my God, if the world could see this. But Jack loved his family and he was warm about it. And so, again, he was different on the golf course because he played for that reason, to be competitive. But he was a very warm, approachable family guy.
Well, he must have seen that in you too, Charlie. How do we get the book? We've teased people about it. How do we get our own copies?
Two ways, really. Amazon is carrying it, and also the USGA bookstore. So they also carry the book. Either one of those ways, you can get the book.
It's called Arnie and Jack, Stories of My Long Friendship with Two Remarkable Men. This is Charlie Mechem. He is the friend of these two men and the author of this book. Charlie, in my fantasy, as I have listened to you all this time, I've got this fantasy that one day you and I will spend some time in Arnie's restaurant. I'll buy you an Arnold Palmer and you can tell me some more stories.
Well, you'll have to have a Kettle One because that was really his favorite drink.
I'm right there.
I would be honored to host you anytime.
That's really exciting to look forward to. Charlie Mechem. He is the author. He is a Renaissance man who's done so much in his life to be proud of that maybe they'll be writing a book about him someday. This is People Who Play the Game. Charlie, thank you so much for your time. Be well, be safe, and we'll see you down the road.
I'm honored and pleased to have been with you, Frank, so much.
Thank you.